Welcome to the week 3 of the JavaScript programming course CS112. In this week, we will be focusing on the essential JavaScript statements. So, our main objective here is basically to code, test, and debug the application. We are going to learn. Basically, we are learning the same thing during past 2 weeks, but we are building on our expertise. So we will be describing the rules for evaluating a conditional expression that consists of relational operators. So basically we are going to learn some conditional block or if else block, the logical operators, and we will be using boolean variables. Then we will be also focusing on some iterative loops, like do while or the for loops. We'll be showing you some code examples as needed. So I I recommend that you use your book, the textbook, and read the book and also work out the examples given there on your VS Code. In fact, you can download all the code, source code, from the student portal of that book for free. So download it and set it up with VS Code using the instructions I gave for the lab 1A in the very first lecture. So that way you will be able to do a lot of practices. In this week we will also learn how to use for in and for off loop for processing each element in an array. So let's start. Now, the relational operators, if you want to compare to uh, identifiers, to variables, we need the relational operators, right? So the relational operator that are very interesting are basically these are the specifically the relation operators we are going to use. These are equal to operator, not equal to operator, greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to. These are the main operators. So when you look at the conditional expressions, you are looking at like last name equals Hopper, test score equals 10, and also the first name not equals Grace. I mean, things like that. You can see the conditional expressions here, right? So these are the typical conditional expression we are going to use. So for example, you see the third set, test score greater than 100. So let's say we have an example where we require some to display some test score that is more than 100. I'm not going into discussion whether that is possible or not. Maybe they have some rules, they have some extra credit, I don't know, but that is the criteria you are going to lay out when you try to do a test score more than 100. Okay, so the syntax of there is a global isNaN method. So you can say the isNaN, then the expression. So basically, if the example of isNaN method, like isNaN hopper results true, isNaN some decimal number returns false. We will see the importance of isNaN in a moment. So what is isNaN after all? So here you see isNaN, that's what we are talking about. Um, when you talk about isNaN, is basically says, I mean, if an expression inside the isNaN function in JavaScript, whether that's a numeric or non-numeric. So what do you expect here? Is Hopper is numeric or non-numeric? So it's non-numeric, right? So if it is non-numeric, then it should be nan in respect of its nature. If it were numeric, then you'd say is nan to be false. Like in the second case, this is a numeric expression and that's why it is false. But in the first case, hopper is a string, it's not a numeric value, so it is returned to be true. Is nan operations, the function is nan on the argument hopper, a text is returned to be true. So that's how the isNaN method is evaluated. There are examples of logical operators. What is meant by logical operators? Let's say we have two conditional operation. Let us say we have a number in a situation. Let us say the score of an exam. We have a number. A student got 95. Now, what is their grade? So let's say how do you do that? You would say that if the grade is greater than 90 or greater than equals 90, then that student gets A. But what happens if they get B? I mean, how do you, what happens if their score is not 90, not more than 90, let's say 86? So then typically what you would do, you would create some criteria like the score is greater than equals 85 and less than equals 90, the grade is B plus. So then what you do? Greater than equals 85 and less than equals 90, less than 90. So this is these two criteria, these two um, these two conditions are joined by AND criteria. So it will return true if both expressions are true. So if the student's score is 86, then it is more than 85, more than equals 85, and it is at the same time it is less than 90. So you will get the student that will be evaluated as true and the student's grade will be B plus. You can have some OR criteria as well. You can see when you put a OR, it returns basically a true if either expression is true, any one of them is true. This operator only evaluates the second expression if necessary. And then you have the NOT operator. So it reverses the value of the Boolean expression. Let us say we say in the previous example, let's say here, if we put not is none hopper, then it should return false, right? Is nan hopper is returns true. Then if you put in this sign, this exclamatory sign or not sign, then you would expect not is nan hopper to be false. So that's how these logical operators are evaluated. So the conditional expression you can see here, the AND operator, you can see age greater than 70 and score less than 70. You can put some AND operator. You can see the OR operator as well as the NOT operator. The order of precedence for logical operators are: number one is NOT operator, then you have the AND operator, and then third we have the OR operator. So up to this point, what did we learn? We learned some conditional expression, we learned the relational operator, then we learned some compound conditional expression which is joined by some logical operators. Then we learned what is logical operator, order of precedence, and so on. So I think we should show you some example. Let's dive into some examples. So here is some lab. So let's say we are going to the test code. We have been talking about the test codes, right? So it's a very simple app. So what it does, it calculates average test scores, and the most of the activities are happening inside this JS file, JavaScript file. Let's see what it is. So you see here, I mean, it is getting the test score as a prompt. So as a user, you are supplying the test score, whatever it is. Then it starts the evaluation. It says if the score greater than equals 0 and score less than equals 100. So that's the validation range of the score, test score. Then you can say total equals total plus score. So you are adding it to the total score, and then you add the count, increment the count operator, because in the beginning you initialized this count, this total and this score. So then you on the HTML space, this is a typical way you write something from your JavaScript onto your HTML page, write it back there. You use this document.write. So then you include the HTML element. Here we are including the paragraph P. Then you write score equals dollar count. I mean, this is the typical expression for including something from JavaScript into your web page. So you do the, I mean, you do the score, and then you do the count, and then you display the score. So if the users isn't ending scores, you can put -1 so that you don't keep up adding the score to the total. So if the score is not equals 1, I mean, that's the range you are running this process. We will learn later that the iterative loops. But then at the end of this day, line number 26, you will calculate the average as total by count. So what is the average score? And of course this is an integer, so you won't get the decimal points, and then you get the average score. So let's see how this works out. So you run and debug from your Visual Studio Code, VS Code. Click on here. So you choose Web App Chrome, and here you see it. So enter the test score. Let us say 95, one test score. Let's say enter a test score, enter -1 to end score. So let's keep on adding. Let's say the next test score is 91. But let's say the next test score is 86, and let's end it. I mean, let's end the scores, and then you will see that score 1 is 95, score 2 is 91, score 3 is 86, and then average score is 90. So that's how it is calculated. If you see the code here, this test code.js, this code is translated into this outcome. Okay, so this is the lab that we can see that where we have used the conditional operator here. I mean, you can see a simpler one, like for example, suppose you are calculating the future value of something. Let's say interest rate. You are doing interest calculation. You can see the similar thing there. Let's go to the simpler example. The miles per gallon. It's a very popular example, and of course, I mean, don't forget that you are using the CSS file, which is here. It's a part of the web specification, the web development specification, the style sheet file, and then we have the JavaScript file here. So here you can see the conditional operators, how we are using miles greater than 0 and gallons greater than 0. Then only the entries are valid. So we are putting an AND operator. What does it mean? It means in order that the code, I mean the condition at line 11 enters into this logical block, I mean this logical block is between line 11 to 20 only if these two conditions are satisfied. Both condition needs to be satisfied. Okay, and if any of them is not satisfied, then you will see an error, one or both entries are invalid. So again you are prompting, and that's how you do it. So let's say, I mean, how these conditional operators are running. So let's run the code again. So we have to stop the previous code and now run this new code. So you see this, the miles driven, let us say 100, and the gallons, let's say I put 0, no gas. So you see one or both entries are invalid. So that means that our code did not make it into this block here. It did not make it into this block. So that's why we get this alert. Okay, so this is a demo of how our conditional block works. So doing some generalization, um, you can see that the syntax of the if statement is like that. If condition 1, and then you have the statement, else if condition 2, then you have the statements, and finally you have else the statement. So you see uh, there is a combination of if, else if, and else. So if this condition is valid, then you do something, that's the statements. Else, I mean, if that is not valid, then check for another condition, then you have else if. You use else if only you have another condition for validation of your execution. Now you use else if there is no more condition. If all the other conditions are not satisfied, then only this code will go to this else, the final else block. An if statement with else clause can look like this. I mean, if age, let me get the pointer. So if age is greater than equals 18, then you may vote, else you are not old enough to vote. So that's how it works. Now an if statement with else, if and else clauses. So you see is nan rate, I mean, so what does it mean? Is nan rate should be, in order that it is true, the rate should be numeric. So you did not provide a number for the rate if it is false. I mean, if it is true is nan rate. So if it is a numeric, then you should not get the if block activated. If it is let's say is nan xyz, a text, a string, then you will see the number, I mean this alert. So in the world of JavaScript, everything that you enter from the user interface, when you enter it to begin with, is a string, right? You cannot control a user. But what happens there after the user enters something, then the JavaScript validates what's the type of the input that the user entered. So if the user entered a string, then it is not a number. So isNan function will return a true because it's nan. I mean, it's not a numeric value. But on the contrary, if the user enters a numeric value, it can be an integer, it can be a float, it can be, I mean, it can be a decimal value, it can be an integer, then isNan should be false. So that's how this isNan operation work. This function works in that way. But then if the rate is numeric, then you would do the further validation of the rate. If it is less than 0, it does not make any sense, right? If you talk about some interest rate and if it is less than 0, it doesn't make any sense. So you say that the rate may not be less than 0. But then if the rate is more than 12, maybe there is a rule that rate cannot be more than 12, then you say the rate may not be greater than 12. If all these conditions, condition number 1 this one, condition number 2 this one, condition number 3 this one, all these things conditions are not valid, then only you go to the else criteria and then you alert this particular statement. Okay, so that's how if statement with else if and else clauses work. This is an example. So what you can do, open your simple VS Code and try to plug in something like that. I mean, just take the examples of the book and try to come up with some situation and practice. That way you will learn the if statement with else if and else clauses. Now you can have a compound condition. So what do you mean by compound condition? So far, I mean, before that we had only one condition inside the if or else if block. Here if is nan red, this is one condition, but it may be so that you want two things to verify at the same time, so then you are using the compound condition. So let's say is nan on the user entry, I mean if the user entry is nan, I mean it's true, or user entry less than equals 0, that is also true, then you can say that please enter a valid number greater than 0. So that's how you use a compound conditional expression. Now how do you test a boolean value to see if it is true, if is valid equals true? You can do that, or you can use the second criteria, is valid. Well, I mean it is very personal choice for the programmer or the group of programmers working as a part of an enterprise project. So sometimes they decide that they will keep it equals false equals true. When they do it, it's not that the programmers are backdated or they are following some old conventions. It's not like that. It's equally I mean if you put equals or if you put a single line, a single word is valid, they are the same to the compiler or interpreter. It doesn't make any they do not make any difference. It's the way, it may be the way you choose how to write the code. Maybe you are inheriting a lot of legacy code from, let's say, in the enterprises it's quite standard that they maintain the code for 10-20 years. It can be. So then before, I mean when they started coding, maybe initial code contained certain convention. Sometimes people can choose to follow the same convention all along, or they will dive into some major refactoring effort if time permits, and they will convert it into a single way. But it is not a good practice to mix and match the convention. Now question is, if you do the mix and match, like if you write is valid equals true somewhere, if you write is valid single word somewhere, will that break the code? The answer is no. But it will violate the uniformity convention of the code. It will not be a bug, but it will be not good for someone who is reading the code, because there will be little bit there may be some confusion around that. So that's about it. Now we are going to learn the while loop. So the while loop, when do you need a while loop? So basically when you have something, some iterative things going on. Let us say I am entering the scores for 50 students in an application, in a program. So then I typically start a while loop until that condition. You see there the syntax, that is while, then you put a parenthesis and you put a condition within the parenthesis, then you do the statements. Now that's why while loop is called precondition loop. That is, before you entering into the statement body for the while loop, you pre-qualify the condition. If the condition is not qualified, or as soon as the condition becomes disqualified, the while loop will stop working. Okay, it will go to the next possible step in the code. So that's why while loop is called a preconditional loop, and it is used for uh, some iterative process in the program. So here, for example, a while loop code is given. So let sum equals 0. So you have some example where sum equals 0, I equals 1, I is the counter, let us say. So then while I less than equals 5, you keep on adding it to the sum, and then at the end of the day you stop, and then you do I plus plus, you have incremented. So at the end it will be displaying 15. The alert sum will display 15. Why? Because in the first step I equals 1, so you have sum plus equals 1, so it's 1, and then you increment I by 1 2, so 1 plus 2 equals 3, and so on. I mean, until I becomes 6. At when I becomes 6 here in this line, then it will go back to the while, but then the condition will be not valid. Then it will exit the while loop, and it will go to this line, alert sum, and the sum will be 15. So that's how the while loop works. So a while loop, for example, this is an example of a while loop that ensures that a user enters a positive numbers. So how it works? Let's say we put let years equals parse int. That's parse int is for parsing the user input as an integer. Then you prompt, then you put the number of years. Now after you get the years, if is nan equals true, is nan years equals true, let's say I write some word instead of number, then it will be true. Or years less than equals 0, then you should say um, years must be valid positive number. Okay, so this is a typical usage of a while loop. You can have a different flavor of iterative criteria. You might opt for do while condition. So there, what you do do statements while condition. So in this way, do whatever you want to do here, and then while. So basically do while loop is same as while loop, except for the fact that do while loop is post conditional. The validation happens after you execute the block. So while loop is a preconditional loop, but do while loop is a post conditional loop, but their outcomes should be similar. They have the same outcome, but the way you validate or you control the loop is different. So that's the difference between a do while and a while loop. So this is in this slide, I am showing an example of the code that follows a do while criteria, and in the previous slide I have shown you a code that follows the while criteria. In the while criteria, you can clearly see that condition is applied first, the statement body comes next. But in the do while, you see the statement body comes first, the condition comes next. So that's how a while and a do while loop work. Now comes the another form of iterative statement in JavaScript. So this is called for statement or for loop. Popularly it is called a for loop. This for loop, while loop, and do while loop is not just the syntaxes of JavaScript. It is everywhere. I mean, in the programming world, if you code in C++, C, uh, if you code in Python, if you code in Java, they are almost the same, if not exactly the same. Now, you can see a for loop that adds the numbers from 1 through 5. Okay, this is the example. So we have done it before as well. You see here, this is not exactly the same, but kind of similar. But here you can see, I mean, it's exactly the same actually. You start with 1 and then add it until it is less than equals 5. So in this case it should look like sum equals 0, of course, and then you do all the initialization, all the variable declarations inside the for loop. So it's kind of an inline way of creating the loop. Okay, so you do sum equals 0 and then you do a for loop, let I equals 1, I less than equals 5 separated by semicolon, then you have I plus plus, and then you move on, right? At the end you alert sum. So this, what does this alert mean? Alert is an inbuilt function of the JavaScript that shows some alert, basically that shows some pop-up on your website. So let's do some lab. So here on chapter 3 you have this lab. Actually you can download it from the student portal of the book, that is free of cost, and you can download it and um, include it on your Visual Studio Code following the lab 1a that I showed you in a previous video. So if you do that, let's say this is the future value calculation. What happens here, this is the index file. So it starts with doc type HTML. This is a typical start of index file, I mean HTML file. Then you have the HTML tag, then you have the head. Inside the head you include the style sheet, so it is applicable to the entire page. Then you have the body, and there you include the JavaScript file. This is a very common way of writing including the JavaScript in an HTML. And we already talked about the main tag, right? We are using HTML5, so we know about the main tag. So just go to the week 1 lecture for knowing more about these tags. Anyways, so let's go to the future value dot future value.js, this JavaScript file. You can see here we are using the do while loop. See here the example that we just discussed. We also use the for loop, the future value. So what we do here, the future value equals the investment, to begin with. So this is the value you have for the investment. You are entering this value. So you are investing $1,000, let us say. So that is your future value to begin with. Then you run over the years. So future value plus equals future value times interest rate times 100. I mean, that's how you are calculating it, and that's how the future value gets compounded. Okay, and finally you display the results. And again, documents.write is a way to publish your HTML elements from within the JavaScript. Okay, so that's how you can do it. So if I want to run it, go to index.html and then run and debug, click on it. So choose the web app Chrome. So you get it. So let's say I am investing $1,000. Then what is the interest rate? Let's say 4% interest rate. So then how many years? Let's say I'm putting 5 years. Then what it does, it is the investment amount, interest rate, years, and future value is 1216, just $216 more. It will earn $216.65 interest. So but the main thing is, this is how we calculated it. So you have used a do while loop as well as a for loop for doing this calculation. Okay, so let's stop this application and let's go back to the presentation. So when you use the for loop, you are not necessarily doing increment by one. You can do it whatever step you want to increment certain things. You can increment by 2, 10, whatever you want. For example, this for loop here, let me activate the pointer, the laser pointer. So this for loop here, what it does, it increments the counter by 2, and as a result it displays, it starts from 0. It displays 0, 2, 6, 4, 8 and 10. You can do it yourself inside one of the codes and check it for yourself. Now a loop that decrements the counter, it should not incremental, it should not be just incremental, it could be decremental as well. You have to make sure that you are putting it in the right context. Like, you should not do I less than something. Like here in the first case, you should, since you are decrementing, it should be more than or equal to something. So you can do it in that way, and you can see that it will display this way. Okay. So we have already discussed about the MPG application. So I'm skipping it. I have shown you in the when I was doing the lab. So this code I'm not going to discuss because we already uh, discussed about this code. So what I am expecting from you is that instead of going through the slide for this code, I want you to download the code from the student portal of the book and load it inside your VS Code and practice it by yourself. Okay, so these are the results. We already discussed about these results, so we don't need to go through it over and over again. So let's say now we are talking about the array. You know what is array? Array is the collection of elements. But then why array? The array is the most elementary form of collection. You can have different types of collections. We will talk about it later, not now. But array is a collection of elements. Let's say you want to you want to group 5 numbers together, 1 2 3 4 5. You can define an array to hold these 5 numbers. So that's how array is defined. Now how you define the array? So in the JavaScript world, the array is an object. Okay. So an object, how do you create an object? You can create an object using a new function, new operator. New is basically a way you generate a new object or you instantiate a new object. So the capital array, this is a constructor. If you just write capital array, A is capital, and then you have ARR, AY array. Just writing array does not make any sense. But when you write constant array name equals new array and then you specify the length, then that makes a sense, because that really creates an array in practice in the memory space of your code with the length, I mean that number of elements. So let's say you want to generate an array with 10 elements, then you have to pass length equals 10 here. I mean you have to pass the number 10 instead of length. So if you use an array literal, you can use a literal as well. In that case you use array name equals a third parenthesis, the square bracket, third parenthesis or square bracket. So that's also possible. That's also a possible way of creating an array. The statement that creates an array is kind of constant totals, this one, this literal. So syntax for referring to an element in an array, you can do it in this way: array name and then you specify the index. So it is I mean it is a discussion around the data structure, but I want to say, I'm tempted to say here, I'm tempted to discuss it here because it's very important. This way, if you can find, you can see that if you have an array of 10, of length 10, then you can easily find the array, the element of the array at the fifth space. You can do array 4. It starts with 0. So this way, uh, the structure that we are talking about, which can be accessed by simply specifying an index, is called a random access structure. There can be two different type of structures: random access structure, this is this way, or you can have a sequential access structure that you have to go through the sequence in order to find a given element. So when you will learn the elementary data structures, you will find that these random access structures are beneficial in terms of efficiency of the code. We will discuss it later in a different course, but I just gave you some introduction here. So how do you add values to an array? So we start an array with an empty array. Const total equals square bracket, nothing inside it, is basically an empty array. Okay, so there is no element there. Now you can add total 0, 1, 2. That means you are adding three different elements to the array. So basically, within the JavaScript, using the array syntaxes, you are able to add elements dynamically to an array. So when you use this literal, so using a single statement, you can do constant total, and then you can specify three values. Then you are basically creating an array with three elements. So you can use the first way, that is the first block, or use the second block. The outcomes will be the same. Okay, so the syntax for getting the length property of an array. So sometimes you may want to, how many arrays are there. Let's say you have a data, you have some data, some array data, where you have the names of the students, and you want to know first how many students are there in the first place. Then you would do array name dot length. That gives you how many elements are there inside the array. Then a statement that gets the length of an array is basically const count, and then you do total dot length. How do you add value to the end of an array? So you can do totals, total dot length equals this one. So basically what you do here, you have an array with three values, 1, 2, and three elements, 0, 1, and 2. You want to add a fourth element, that means 0, 1, 2, 3, the value 3. Then you would typically do that. That way you can increase, you can append a value to the end of an array. So I said that arrays, literal, if you use the arrays in JavaScript, they are dynamic arrays. Means if you can flexibly add an element at the end of an array. So that is how you can do it. So you can see a code that puts the number 1 through 10 into an array, and the syntax is like this. You have constant number and empty array. Then you run a for loop with the following condition, that is I equals 0, let I equals 0, I is the counter, the index, I less than 10. So until I becomes 9, it will be running. And then you do I plus plus, you are incrementing I, and then the numbers are defined in this way. And you can also display the numbers in an array. You can do like this. You can do the numbers you can display the numbers that you created in the first example here in this way, because in display string, you are converting a number to the string by simply appending it with an empty string. Okay, the JavaScript gives you very flexible way of converting one type into another, one primitive type into another type. So that's the example, and you can run it on your VS Code on your browser basically. So you can put the four totals into an array. You define constant totals equals an empty array, then you put total 0 equals 141.95, and then four numbers basically. And remember, this indexing, the array indexing starts from 0. It does not start from 1. It starts from 0. 0, 1, 2 and 3. So the code that sums the total in the array is simple. You write let sum equals 0, then you keep on summing it up. So you run a for loop. How do you sum the things? You run a for loop, then you basically sum it in a sum it up, sum these totals up in a sequential step along with the iterative for loop. Okay. Now the code that displays the totals and the sum, you can do it in this way. Total string is this one. So again, remember that when you are publishing something on your browser, everything is string. Only strings are displayed on the browser. Even if it is a number, it is displayed as a string, right? So then this is the way you do it. You put a line break here under the for loop. You do total string equals totals I plus a line break, and the totals is basically you do the sum and you do the total. So that's the message that you are going to display on the screen. So let's do some lab before we jump into this. So in this lab, actually we are doing the previous test score application, but we are adding an array of the test scores. Okay. So again, I'm not going through the details of how I'm including JS file inside the HTML. I mean, it's same as we did before. Now go to the test scores.js file for test scores array. Here you can see we have created an empty array. Okay, so there is nothing inside the score. Now let's say score equals 0. Then you start a do while loop. You keep on adding the score, I mean including the scores, and then validate the score at line number 11 to 13. If the score is not equals 1, then I mean you can go through this step, and you can see the scores are being added. So now you can see, I mean, in the length, array's length, scores is an array. So we are using array's length. If it is not if it is more than 0, that is non-zero array length, then you do for loop, right? But in the for loop, you can see let I in scores. We will discuss about the in stuff. I mean, for in type of syntax, but basically you are iterating over the scores. This is the way you can iterate over the array. When you iterate over the array, you can have many options. Using the in option is a very good option, because basically what is happening here, you are not trying to represent a lot of types inside your for loop. You are just using I as your index, and then you have the scores. So then you calculate the total in this way. Total equals total plus scores ith score, and then you keep writing it on your document, and at the end of the day you are doing the average as we did before, and you publish it back. Let's see how it works. So run and debug Chrome, and you can do a test score 96. Then let's do 91. Let's do 82, and you add and then put -1. So you stop at supplying the numbers. So you can see that you basically carried out the calculations over a number of over the entities in the array, and then finally arrived here. Okay, so you use the for in loop. So that's a lab to demonstrate the for loop, and also specifically the for in loop, where we have iterated over the elements of an array. So the syntax of the for in loop that we just illustrated in our previous lab, you can see that for you have the index initialization in array. I'm just activating the pointer. So yeah, okay, I'm done. So you have the for loop, you have the statements, then code that totals the number in the array using a for in loop is as simple as this one. That's what we did. So you can also use the for off loop. Okay, so the syntax is very simple: for, and then you do value initialization of array statements. So let val of totals, but what is the difference? The val that holds the current value. In the previous case, if you do the in I holds the current index, not the current value. You are holding the current index. But here in the second example, you are holding the current value. So if you would go back to your lab, you could have replaced it in a very simple way, you know. So let's try it. So you do for let I of scores. Okay, so then what I would do here, I will do total equals total plus total plus I. Okay, and then we do document write, I mean in this way, but there will be a small error. You can do you can write the scores. So what you have to do here, you have to start a counter. So let's say let j equals 0. J will be the index now, and then you do j plus plus here, and then you put j here, and j here. But then at the end of the day, your things, I mean everything will be the same. So let's try this code out. So let's stop the previous run and start the new run. So you put it like that. Let's say 95, 90 and 82, and -1. You stop here. So you can see there is some error. Score 1, everywhere it is displayed as score 1. Why it is like that? Let's see. Let's investigate that. So what you are doing here, oh sorry, it should be j, not I, I'm sorry. So that was the error. Let's start it over again, run and debug. So this one, no, this is wrong. I did something wrong here. So let's go back here. Let's delete the launch.json. We already talked about it in a small video, right? Short video. So then you can run it right now. So you find it. So 95, let's say 90, let's say 82, -1. So then you can see everything is reflected correctly, and the average is also correct. So that is the way you can use. So we have illustrated in the lab how to use in for in type of loop versus for off type of loop. When you use for in, then the value, the placeholder value, this one, it represents the I represents the index. But if you do the off, then it represents the scores element, the value of the score. So it may make sense if you would replace I with score, but I am not recommending you doing that, because um, let's keep it exactly the same way so that we understand what is the difference between for in and for off loops. Okay, it's simple, right? Okay, so we did a little bit of lab there as well. What's next? So we have learned about the array, right? How to define the array. We learned about the elements of the array. We also illustrated the length. How do you obtain the length of an array? Then we switched our gear to the array literal, the index, the for in loop, for off loop, all those things we have learned here. So I'm not going to go through the details of this code, because we already went through the code by ourselves in the lab session. Just now we completed the lab. So that's all I think we had for this week's lesson. So go through the slides, go through the lecture, and let me know how you work on that. I mean, if does it look okay? Does it Is it too difficult? I mean, all these things. So once you do that, let's we can start discussing about the the homework of this week. I mean, don't miss submitting the discussions. So you have learned a lot of things, right, in this week. So drive your discussions accordingly. So you can give some. Your discussion does not need to have a lot of info. It does not need to contain a lot of information. All you can do, you can go to your book, or go through the slides, or go through online, and then you can study something like, for example, for in loop and for off loop. You can create a few sentences. I mean, 100 to 100 200 word is nothing if you want to create a discussion. So choose some few statements, few descriptions around for in and for out loop, for off loop, and put it as the discussion, because this discussion is extremely important. It acts as your attendance. If you don't submit your discussion, I mean, on an average 80% of the discussion, if you don't submit those, then you will be marked as not attending the classes. And as per the school's policy, there is always a chance that your roster will be eliminated from the class. We don't want to run into that situation, so that's why the discussion is so much important. And I just told you that it is not of that much I mean, it is not that much hard to to put together a discussion. You can have the reference from book, reference from slide, reference from lecture. You can have reference from online. Go Google and find out some topics from there and put it inside the discussion. Question is, uh, what are the limits of the discussions? I mean, first of all, I mean, it's a good way if you ask some questions to me as well. Like, you can say that I do not understand for of loop. Here are my questions. Here are the points that is not. I mean, I'm not understanding. Then I will be able to illustrate the points again, and also your peers, your peer classmates will also come up with some solutions of their own. So that way we will be more interactive among each other, and which is very essential for us when we are writing the program. The collaborative work, the teamwork is very important when you are doing the programming. Okay, so have a nice week, and let's go through all this coding, and let me know if you have any questions. Okay, thank you. Bye.